Welcome to Escape the Noise, a podcast about hiking, mental health, and everything in between. I'm Joe Vogel, your host. We're coming to you from the Silicon Slopes studio in downtown Provo, Utah. Our guest this week, Devin Ashby. Several years ago, Devin started a YouTube channel called Backcountry Exposure, where he reviewed backpacking and camping gear. Fast forward to 2024, and he has amassed over 60,000 subscribers. Devin also teaches a backpacking course at Utah Valley University. Join us as he talks about how he was able to build a career out of a passion and why introducing the next generation to hiking and camping is so important to him.
So I've been teaching since 2017 and well over 100 plus students at this point. And I have seen many, many students develop very strong friendships.
Yeah.
Just from, I never knew you before this class, which they're small classes to begin with.
Right.
Max of 10 students.
Okay.
And that's for various reasons, but never knew you before this class. And now we're like best friends.
Look, you bond with people in a different way when you do hard things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And when you do unique things, right? Like things that are kind of out of the ordinary flow of life, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's like if you just show up like to a college class, right? And it's just like another lecture, another assignment or whatever, like that's going to be a different experience than going to like the Uintas.
Yeah.
For a few days, right? And having that experience and being able to connect with people on that level.
Yeah, and I think there is a little bit of a disconnect from the idea that a lot of us know that there's businesses out there that use the outdoors as like therapy. Like there's wilderness therapy programs.
Right. They
work with youth, adults, like for all sorts of different things. We don't have to get into it, but even if you peel back the layers a little bit and say, well, that doesn't have to apply just to people that have substance abuse problems or whatever it is, like this is like healthy for me as just me.
For anybody.
Right.
Like in any situation, right? Like when we, like our motto is escape the noise, right? Like when we talk about that, it's not or any, it's not necessarily just for people that are struggling with depression or anxiety or anything. It's just that we all benefit from reconnecting with nature, right? And from just getting away from screen saturation.
Yeah. One of my, and this is a really like simple plug, but this book reads like a textbook. So it's not the most fun read.
Yeah.
But it's, as a dad myself, I've got three young kids. It's been a very paramount like part of how I want to father my children.
Yeah.
The book is called Last Child in the Woods, and it focuses on the idea of in today's generation, and this was even written like 20 years ago. So now things have even progressed even more where there's less green space. It's harder for kids to get outside. Like parents are worried about just sending their kids outside and allowing them
like even down the street.
Down the street.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's this idea of like kids aren't having the outside play that maybe you and I had.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a child of the 90s.
Yeah.
And I spent time away from the house. And if you heard the whistle at 5:30, 6 o'clock, that meant come home.
Yeah. No, that was, yeah. I mean, I was born in 81, so I got some of the 80s too. In the 80s, like, yeah, I mean, it was a different ball game, right?
Totally
kids
different.
were just running wild.
Yeah. But the idea is that we want to provide opportunities for kids, adults, youth to be able to go out and spend time outside, be in the sun and like enjoy that vitamin D. And before we started recording this today, I was mentioning that I'd been out on a trip for 6 days with students.
Yeah.
And one of the key things that is different about a trip like that, where you're disconnected from cell service for 6 days. That's a long time to like not have your phone in front of you and scroll on Instagram or whatever. there's a like very visible reset that happens in that period of time. And some of it's like your circadian rhythm gets reset and like you're sleeping better and your stress levels go down because you're going to sleep with the sun, you're waking up with the sun. Like there's studies and information around all of the benefits of that.
Yeah.
And going back to that book, just the idea of make time to spend outside.
Yeah.
Like go out and just disconnect and enjoy it. Like
for yourself, and like if you have kids, obviously, you know, you mentioned your kids, right? Like this is something that is front of mind, right?
Yeah.
For me too, as a father, right? Like just thinking about like, you know, they're growing up in a completely different world.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do you still give them some, I mean, we can't replicate the 80s or 90s, right?
No.
Like that world's gone, right? It's long gone. But how do you replicate some of those like wild experiences, right? Some of that, just that freedom that, like you said, just being surrounded by natural things, being away from constant alerts, scrolling screens, you know, just kind of asking that question, because I mean, the benefits are well researched, well known, right? Like these are things that are pretty obvious, right? Like when any of us think about them, but it's like also somehow so difficult for us to kind of, because society is going one way, and this is really just basically saying, I'm not going to go that way. Yeah. Right. I'm not just going to go with the flow of where society is taking us. Right. I'm going to actually make a conscious decision to do something different.
Yeah. I think it just comes down to the fact of like, make the effort to make it happen. From a solo standpoint, go out. And I think there's maybe a slight misunderstanding of, in order for you to have those outdoor experiences, I've got to go summit a peak. Yeah. Like to have that dopamine release, to have that stress release of whatever it is. Like, no, even just going for a walk in the park. Yeah. And like not taking your phone with you.
So is helpful.
You don't have it in your back pocket. And you're like, well, I'm not going to look at my phone. Yeah. It's like, no, leave the phone in the car and just go walk for 20 minutes. Yeah. And like, listen to the birds, listen to the wind. Like, that even by itself makes such a difference in your ability to escape the noise, right. I guess you could say.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, you know, I'm wondering, you know, I kind of want to, I guess, flesh out a little bit more this idea of backpacking as a different kind of experience, right? Because again, we focus a lot on hiking here. I love hiking because it's so simple and so easy. Right. And I'll be honest, even for me, like I've been camping before, I've been backpacking. I think I told you before the show, like some weekends, you know, but I've never done like a long trip. And there is a part of me that feels kind of intimidated by it. Like, is it going to cost a lot to get all the gear? Like, is it like, so what are some of the kind of just like basic, like amateur things that you would need to know to like take a longer trip?
I would start with understanding what trip you want to do, and then just look at the basics of the gear that facilitates the opportunity to go on that trip. Yeah. I think, and this is something that's kind of interesting on YouTube right now. And for the last like 5 or so years, there's been this really hard push for like ultralight. Everything has to be the lightest, fanciest gear for you to be able to get out. And I think part of that's because the idea of through hiking, doing long distance trails, has become really popular. Yeah. Like it's a trendy thing for you to go be homeless for 6 months and hike a trail, which is fine. It's not my style. It's not what I enjoy doing, but it because it became so popular, it's made its way into the general idea of backpacking. And so what I'm actually trying to do is put more emphasis on, it doesn't matter what gear you have, just go out and enjoy being outside. If you hike a quarter mile with a pack on and you stay overnight, you're a backpacker as much as somebody that hiked from Mexico to Canada. Yeah. And so that's like...
So you wouldn't even really necessarily draw a distinction like between backpacking and hiking?
I mean, they're the same thing. The difference is,
I just think the one for me at least has like the implication that it's like a more, in depth, like it's like more of a commitment, right? It's like you're bringing more, it's like a longer stay, like that just seems to be like,
it's the difference of I'm staying the night.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And I have to have a tent, a sleeping bag, a pad, a stove to cook food, all of that stuff that you wouldn't necessarily take on a day hike.
Right.
So that's the distinction. But the point I'm making is I don't care if your pack weighs 60 pounds because you brought a 4-person 10-pound camping tent that you would normally use as a family, and you hike a quarter mile, like you're still a backpacker.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter that you have super fancy $600, $700 tent that weighs 1 pound.
Yeah.
For you to qualify yourself as
I think that's a good point to make. And I think stuff like that, I think making it more accessible to people is good, is valuable. I'm just curious, how did you get into it? Like, was it young? Were you a kid, or like was it later in life? Like,
I was, I guess, blessed to grow up in a family that loved spending time outside. So family vacations were camping trips. Mm-hmm. And so we would go camping.
Yeah.
I actually did not backpack with my dad until I think it was 2018. It was the first time that he and I went backpacking together.
Okay. But you did a lot of camping.
We did a ton of camping. My first ever backpacking trip was actually with my grandpa.
Oh, nice.
We hiked up Rock Canyon and did an overnight trip that way.
Where'd you stay?
Just below the now like campground that's up there.
Oh yeah.
Near the Squaw Peak junction.
Gotcha.
Kind of in that area.
Yep. Yeah, that's really pretty up there.
But then like through scouting, I did backpacking trips in the Uintas, and I had a neighbor who was a youth leader that he was more or less a mentor.
Yeah. That
he opened the door for me to kind of like realize that I actually really enjoy carrying all this on my back and going out.
Oh, you're one of those people.
I'm one of those people. And then there was a trip that I did when I was 14 with 2 neighbor friends that, again, this is a product of the 90s where 14, 15, and 16-year-old boys, parents dropped us off at the Highline Trailhead in the Uintas, and we went for 5 days.
Just stand by me kind of stuff,
Yeah. Like we'll be back out at the trailhead at this time on this day.
Yeah.
And come pick us up.
That was normal.
Yeah. I look at my two daughters. They're 8 and 7. I'm like, never in my life would I
feel like you might get like arrested now for like child neglect.
Yeah. So I realized what I loved and what I was passionate about. And then I also found climbing when I was 13, 14 years old. And I just I went all in on the outdoors. And then after high school, got into college, and I was actually studying photography and was like, I'm going to be a freelance professional photographer. And then I was like, I actually don't want to work for myself. Mm-hmm. So why am I doing this? Now I am working for myself, oddly enough.
It's funny how life plays out.
Yeah, right. But a very good friend from high school, she was like, why don't you join the outdoor recreation management program? And I'm like, I didn't even know that was a thing. So then I looked into it, and I hate to be cliche, but it genuinely changed my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you have somebody in particular that really made a difference for you in that trajectory, or was it just the overall experience?
The overall experience, but I skipped over maybe a really important part of my development in the space of the outdoor industry. In high school, there was a program called Unified Studies. And I've always been the kind of learner that I'm a very visual, hands-on learner.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you stand at the front of the classroom and just lecture to me,
Mm-hmm. I'm
out. Like I'm not going to absorb anything you said.
You learn by doing things.
Learn by doing things in that setting. And so Unified Studies was this outdoor integrated studies class.
Oh, interesting.
So the high school was A days and B days,
Mm-hmm.
and your entire B day was in the same classroom with the same two teachers.
Nice.
And it was all focused on outdoor minded activities, but you got your English, science, PE, social studies, and your fine arts credit.
Where was
from
this?
Orem High School.
Oh, in Orem.
Mm-hmm. Yep, Orem High School.
Go Orem High School.
Yeah. The program doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately.
That is very unfortunate.
But it ran for 30, 40 years. But what was neat about it is instead of doing like an English research paper, we went out and we did a project of like bird watching.
Mm-hmm.
And the English that we wrote was focused on like
It had an experiential component. Yeah.
Identifying the birds
Yeah.
and writing about them and like putting this booklet together of like all of the birds that we identified from looking through binoculars. We had a whole botany section where we made plant presses and we'd go hiking during school, go up Rock Canyon, go into the Uintas, go wherever, collect native plants, press them, dry them, identify them, and like...
Seems awesome.
It was amazing.
It seems like really sad that that's been discontinued.
Yeah.
Because I think, especially, for learners like you, like that would be super valuable. And I know a lot of people that, would benefit. I think most people would benefit from that.
Yeah. And it was that like experiential education, as you mentioned, that where I realized this is how I learn. And it's also what I'm passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just love being outside.
Yeah.
And that opportunity made me realize that I don't want to be an accountant. I don't want to do kind of like those traditional types of degrees. Like,
it's good for people to figure that out too, about themselves and like what, what's going to be fulfilling, what they're good at, what interests them. Let me ask you this, especially since now I know that you grew up in Orem. So Timpanogos, what's your experience with Mount Timpanogos?
It's the mountain.
Yeah.
Like it's majestic and incredible. And it has so many awesome memories because of what it is. Yeah. And what that single mountain provides. Like it's
like a whole world, right?
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a national monument with incredible caves.
Yeah.
The trail systems are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that Sundance, but the fact that there's also designated wilderness that's that close to a metropolis. I mean, the whole Wasatch Front, there's several designated wilderness areas, but that you have that opportunity so close to the city.
Like 15 minutes from the suburbs, right?
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, and that part is unique, I think, because and it's one of the kind of almost surreal experiences when you're hiking Timpanogos, especially if it's not too crowded, like if you go on a weekday or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that you're so close to all this noise, right? But like you feel so far away, especially once you get up there, right? Like it just feels like a completely different world.
Yeah. And I think if the mountain had not been designated as a wilderness area, which I think it's important for people to understand the difference between like what you might call, I'm going to go into the wilderness versus like
actual protected land
through the Wilderness Act that makes it so that is protected in a way that it will always stay that way.
Yeah.
Because there's like, we know how busy the mountain is.
Yeah.
There's thousands of people. I mean, the 1972.
Yeah.
Like
that story.
That story is amazing.
Yeah.
Brought a lot of people onto the mountain, and it still does. Like,
so we should explain that briefly, that they used to do an annual Timp hike, right? And it got so popular that by the late 60s, early 70s, they literally had 5,000 plus people going up at once, right? And that's obviously not good for the mountain. It can't sustain that. So they discontinued that tradition, which was a fun tradition. You know, I think when they started, it was like 10 people. So it grew so much. And you just have to space people out, right? Because they still, I mean, I've heard 100,000 people hike that mountain every year, which is a staggering number. Yeah. But they have to be kind of spread out.
Yeah. And for me, the first time I summited Timp was a sunrise hike.
Was it?
It was.
Yeah.
So, and that was in high school. But now I'm trying to remember where I was going with that. Oh, the wilderness.
Yeah.
You get so many people on the mountain, and I've heard a lot of people say like, well, there should be bathrooms up there. There should be more of this. There should be more of that. And it's like, no, that's what makes it special. Yeah. Like the Wilderness Act doesn't allow for development and for things that, I mean, you have like the shack at Emerald Lake that.
Yeah, I was going to say that's shelter, right?
That's grandfathered in.
Yeah.
And
I think that's more for like almost like emergencies, right? At least when it was initially built, wasn't that kind of the purpose?
Yes, among other things, I'm sure. Yeah. But I know that they're proposing something to do with it.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a decision here pretty soon about whether that's going to, and my sense is that it will be rehabilitated because it was a pretty, over like a period of 5 years, like it just got destroyed. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, the crazy 900 plus inch snow year last year.
Yeah.
Basically
didn't help.
destroyed the shelter.
Yeah.
But I guess the other thing I was going to say is like, I've just always, growing up in Orem and now I live in Saratoga Springs, I frequently just step out my front door and look to the east and just that west face of the mountain covered in snow. Like, the time of day that's my favorite is alpenglow.
Yeah.
And Timp always has like the most amazing alpenglow.
It's stunning.
Like, and it doesn't, even when there's not snow on the front.
Yeah.
But
it keeps
the front side.
I think people that aren't from Utah, you know, it's unique in the sense that the snow stays on it for so long, right? Like most of the Wasatch Mountains, like the snow has melted by now, you know, or soon, right? But Timp is still covered in snow and it just looks so majestic, right? And like you said, I completely agree. Like you go out and look at it at that time and it's gorgeous.
Yeah. And I love its prominence as well. At one point I was trying to hike some of the highest prominence peaks in Utah. And Timp is one of those that it's more interesting to me as a mountain than say Nebo is, which Nebo's the highest peak in the Wasatch.
Yeah.
But Timp is like, Timp, man. It's just like, it is a majestic, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful mountain.
I mean, I'm biased obviously, but, I don't think there's any question that it's Utah's most iconic mountain, right? Just in the sense that like how many people know about it
from a visual standpoint.
Visually, like it's, you know, you can see it throughout all of Utah Valley and, you know, even parts of Salt Lake. So just from that standpoint and just an awareness, you know, people know it probably more than any other mountain, even though like Nebo, like you said, is technically taller. Yeah.
And I just love that there's so much access and it provides any opportunity within 15 to 45 minutes of drive time. Cascade Springs, the caves, American Fork Canyon, like the Alpine Loop, all of it. I mean, just the whole trail system, the wildlife, it's incredible.
Yeah.
You just go on and on, but
yeah, no, we could talk another hour about Timpanogos alone.
I love it.
I guess the last thing I'll ask you is just kind of to come back to, so when we talked about this kind of in the abstract, but I wanted to talk to you just more about it personally. You know, when you're thinking about hiking or backpacking and mental health, right? What does it do for you?
That's a great question. The biggest thing for me is it allows me to keep doing what I love. And this sounds cliche, but like it makes me a better husband and a better father because I'm able to go get the benefits of being outside, reset, and just drive like my personal passions so that I can then in turn channel my energy into being a husband and a father and just like trying to be a better person. Like I have my ambitions of all the things that I want to do outside.
Right.
But there's the subset of this does so much good for me mentally.
Yeah.
Like there's often times where if I've gone a long time without being outside, and you probably know where I'm going with this, my wife will say, you need to go on a trip.
You need to get out of here.
Or like, wait, not really that. She really loves me. She's amazing. But she can tell that like I'm stressed about something. I've got something on my mind and it's been a minute. I need to just go spend some time outside. And every time that I go out and do that and then come back, I've like maybe checked off a bucket list thing or like my to-do list of I just did a trail that I've wanted to do for a long time and I got that out of the way. But I'm also like happier because of what I was able to experience. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Devin, this has been amazing having you on. Like I said, we could keep talking for an hour, but the YouTube channel is Backcountry Exposure. So check him out there. And thanks again for joining us on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having awesome conversations with people, but also like giving back to the community the way that you do.
This has been a lot of fun.
Like, I appreciate it.
I love having these conversations. So, Thanks again to Devin for joining us. You can find him on YouTube at Backcountry Exposure and Instagram at the same handle. Escape the Noise is produced by Timpanogos Hiking Co. I'm your host, Joe Vogel. A big thank you to Kai Bradford for his assistance with scheduling and production, to the Wildfires for our intro music, and to Silicon Slopes and Weston Tanner for hosting us and helping us make it all happen. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you again next episode.